A little over a year ago, almost a year and a half ago, actually, I and my foundation, Landmark Legal Foundation, we filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Environmental Protection Agency, asking for a list of all the regulations they were preparing to issue at some point. That is, all the regulations that they were obviously aware of and working on at that point. And we filed that, and of course the EPA did what it always does. Drags its feet, obstructs, covers up, and then denies. And yet we read a report in the Washington Compost, of all places, that was published over the weekend. And I want you to listen to this. One of these days, Mr. Producer, I'll come in here with my meatball recipe, and we can talk about food. Yes. Actually, I don't have one. I'd have to borrow one from somebody. I just eat them. I don't make them. Anyway, back to reality. This is from Juliet Ilperin. The White House systematically delayed enacting a series of rules on the environment, worker safety, and health care to prevent them from becoming points of contention before the 2012 election, according to documents and interviews with current and former administration officials. Now, let's stop there. So the point of the Obama administration in doing this, and the president in doing this, was to conceal from the American people what they were doing and what they were planning to do, so that when you voted, you would have no idea. You'd be in the dark. So every time Obama says, hey, I won the election, meaning I won the election and I can do whatever the hell I want to. First of all, no, he can't. But secondly, look how this man and his people manipulate the process. Just look what they do. They did it with Obamacare, and the disasters being, felt throughout the nation. But I want to continue with this because this is very important. Some agency officials were instructed to hold off submitting proposals to the White House for up to a year to ensure they would not be issued before voters went to the polls, the current and former officials said. The delays meant that rules were postponed or never issued. The stalled regulations included crucial elements of the Affordable Care Act. That's Obamacare. Aren't they embarrassed with that name? They keep calling it the Affordable Care Act. What bodies of water deserve federal protection? Remember we talked about that? Puddles on your property. Pollution controls for industrial boilers and limits on dangerous silica in the workplace. The Obama administration has repeatedly said that any delays until after the election were coincidental. Look how they lie, and they just keep lying. And that such decisions were made without regard to politics. But 7 current and former administration officials told the Washington Compost that the motives behind many of the delays were clearly political, as Obama's top aides focused on avoiding controversy before his reelection. The number and scope of delays under Obama went well beyond those of his predecessors, who helped shape rules but did not have the same formalized controls, said current and former officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the subject. No, because they don't want to be exposed. Now, those findings are bolstered by a new report from the Administrative Conference of the United States, an independent agency that advises the federal government on regulatory issues. And that report is based on anonymous interviews with more than a dozen senior agency officials who worked with the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which oversees the implementation of federal rules. So, the Office of Management and Budget would have had a crucial role in knowing who was working on what within the federal bureaucracy and holding them up to get past the election cycle. So you see how Obama and the radical left has now politicized the civil service and the regulatory process, because that's what they do. Now, the report said internal reviews of proposed regulatory changes took longer in 2011 and 2012 because of concerns about the agencies issuing costly or controversial rules prior to the November 2012 election. When you look at Obamacare alone, every aspect of that law was done in a way that wouldn't hurt Obama's reelection or the election of Democrats. Every piece of it was a political calculation, so you wouldn't know about major aspects of it, or wouldn't feel them, I should say, until after the election. So this is an attempt to thwart our electoral process. You cannot have a functioning republic if the public's not informed and if the government is intentionally trying to keep the public in the dark. And that's what's going on here. Now, Ronald White, who directs regulatory policy at the advocacy group Center for Effective Government, So he's a lib. Said the overt manipulation of the regulatory review process by a small White House office, that would be OMB, raises questions about how the government writes regulations. He said the amount of time it took the White House to review proposed rules was particularly egregious over the past 2 years. He's whining because they weren't spitting these rules out faster. At the Environmental Protection Agency, a former official said that only 2 managers had the authority to request a major rule in 2012. Then Administrator Lisa P. Jackson, who now works at Apple Computer, and Deputy Administrator Bob Perciasepe, Perciasepe, and the director at the time of this office that we just spoke about was Cass Sunstein, who we've talked about many times. And he's returned to his post at Harvard Law School, where I'm sure he's teaching all kinds of cool ways to sabotage us. So this is what's taken place. So I must tell you, when I read this, I spoke to our general counsel at Landmark Legal Foundation, and I said, let's take a very close look at this and see if this is a basis for litigation. Because we are deposing the former administrator of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, I believe it's in January, about another matter where she and the administration were deceptive, were deceitful, which is why the federal district judge granted our motion to conduct interrogatories and depositions. But look how much work this takes. Look how much cost is involved just in getting to the bottom of this stuff. But an entire administration, an entire massive bureaucracy with scores of departments and agencies, all of which affect you directly or indirectly in one way or another, to one degree or another, were told to sit on their most costly and controversial regulations that you would find problematic, if not flat-out offensive, until after the re-election effort of Barack Obama. So when you see these people on TV or testify, just know what we're dealing with. Thugs who despise you, who despise the small d democratic process, who despise the small r Republican system. And they conduct themselves this way to avoid accountability when accountability is what's needed at election time. It completely distorts the process and undermines Republican government. And that's what they're all about. Yes, fundamental transformation. And they cannot do it with a light shining on them. And they're scheming. And they're working behind the scenes. And they're doing it in department after department and agency after agency with regulation after regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, I've said this is a soft tyranny. I've said the president is imperial. It's getting worse with each passing day. It's getting worse. And yet, I have a column in front of me by this nudnik, David Brooks. And I'm not going to punish you, torture you by reading it. But you know what his complaint is? That the presidency isn't strong enough. All this divided government, one vetoing the other part. We need a stronger presidency. So this lame brain, in the middle of a presidency that conducts itself in an unconstitutional manner, a president who issues executive fiats, a president who orders down his bureaucracy until the optimum time politically to push out regulations, a president who uses his quote-unquote discretion to completely ignore existing federal law or to change existing federal law. I don't care if it's immigration or health care or marriage or what have you. David Brooks' complaint is he isn't strong enough. And this is supposed to be a conservative writing at the New York Slimes. Pretty damn amazing. Meanwhile, we conservatives are the ones being attacked as the purists, you see. No, we're being attacked because we're not feeding at the public trough. We're being attacked by the pigs who are. We're the citizens. We're the ones that fund all of this crap.